You're right. Congress needs to hold Gary Gensler accountable whenever it can. We need to hold hearings, send letters, use the power of the Congressional Review Act whenever possible to make clear that when the SEC has stepped out of line, that Congress will act. In addition, the best thing we can do to reel in the SEC would be to pass our own digital asset regulatory framework. As soon as we get new statutes on the books, Gary Gensler loses the power to regulate by enforcement, and that's what he's been doing.
This content is brought to you by Uphold, which is a great crypto platform that I've been using since 2018. Uphold has all the top cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin and all the altcoins. In fact, they have 260 plus cryptocurrencies on their platform. You can also trade precious metals, stablecoins, and 37 fiat currencies. In addition, they are available in over 150 countries. And this platform is fully reserved. They do audits, so you can trust that your funds are safe, no commingling, no lending out your funds. If you'd like to learn more about Uphold, please visit the link in the description. Welcome to the Thinking Crypto podcast, your home for cryptocurrency news and interviews. With me today is Congressman Mike Flood, who's a Republican out of the state of Nebraska. Congressman Flood, it's an honor to have you on.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Congressman, there's a lot to talk about as it relates to crypto and blockchain and stablecoins and much more. But before we get there, I would love to get to know you a bit better. Tell us about where you grew up and your entrepreneurial background and how you became a politician.
Well, yeah, I'm from Norfolk, Nebraska. That'd be Johnny Carson's hometown. There's probably some people listening to this that have no idea who Johnny Carson is. He was the NBC original Tonight Show host. I grew up in a town where I got involved in the radio business at 15. And loved it so much. I went on to school at Notre Dame. I stayed in the business. I got to law school at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, stayed in the business and was able to start my first station when I was 24. And today I own, plenty of stations across the state of Nebraska. And you can't be in the media business and attending meetings and covering stories without having an interest in politics. And we have the nation's only unicameral in Nebraska, and I'm proud to say I was its speaker for 6 years, spent 10 years in the Nebraska legislature, and then recently was elected to Congress. I have a wife, 2 kids, both football players. We're in the middle of some big-time football right now. One of my boys is playing in the state championship next week, so I'm so excited to be back in Nebraska after 11 weeks in Washington, and we'll hopefully get a big win on Tuesday.
Sure. That's awesome. And congrats to your, I think you mentioned both are playing football, both of your kids?
Yeah, one's in 8th grade though. So his season's over. He's moved on to wrestling, but my older one, yeah, he's still playing now. They have their next game Tuesday.
Wow. So let's jump to the crypto market and all the things that have been happening. So Congressman Flood, we are in a global race for this technology, in addition to other technologies, but blockchain and crypto, the next layer on top of the internet. And many other countries have passed crypto regulations like the EU, the UK. There's clarity overseas. How can the United States get back in the driver's seat here with this technology to have the jobs stay here, have the innovation stay in the US?
Well, you're absolutely right. This is a global race. And we won this race with Web 1.0 back in 1995. The United States Congress and the president, we worked together to build basic rules, just simple rules, just foundational rules that ended up creating huge wealth in the United States as we entered Web 2.0. To your point, we're getting into Web 3 now, and the United States has to get in gear. We have to determine what level we want to lead on. The Securities and Exchange Commission has been a proven barrier for crypto and digital asset formation in the United States. It's absolutely imperative. There's no reason that the United Emirates, should have a leg up on the world's greatest financial services system, the United States. In fact, I've been traveling in the Indo-Pacific region this last summer, and countries like Singapore and Thailand and Japan, they're wanting leadership from the United States in these areas, and we have to be up to the task.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously it takes Congress to work together and pass the laws, and the respective government agencies such as the SEC will follow suit. What will it take to raise the level of urgency to get Congress to focus on this? I know there's 2 bills in the House. I believe there's 1 in the Senate. How can we get these bills through the House and pass by next year, let's say?
Well, thankfully, we have leadership in the House Financial Services Committee, Chairman Patrick McHenry, and Subcommittee Chair of the Digital Assets Subcommittee, French Hill from Arkansas. These 2 top leaders in the Financial Services Committee have decided that digital assets, cryptocurrency, stablecoins, and exchange, all of this is a priority. And I'm pleased to say that even during a busy year with bank failures and the SVB debacle, we have moved to the floor 2, as you mentioned, very groundbreaking bills that will be considered by all members of the House. So I think it is a priority in the House of Representatives, and you will see legislation move through the system. Now, the Senate is different. If you're listening to this, you're watching this right now, and you have a relationship with one of your U.S. senators, no matter where you are in America, you need to be calling your U.S. senator and just educating them about what the opportunities are, not just for you, but for America and our place in the world, so that we can confront the opportunity to put America in the driver's seat as it relates to Web 3.0 and all the things we're talking about. I think our real challenge is in the Senate. I think that's where the hurdles are right now. Mm-hmm. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to get something through. At the end of the day, currency and cryptocurrency, this is not a partisan issue. Mm-hmm. This is where we're going. And it isn't an issue of Republicans and Democrats. Sometimes it's an issue between younger members and more mature members that are only familiar with the fiat currency system. So we just have to take our time and educate people.
Now, let's say the 2 bills make it through the market structure and the stablecoin bill, make it through the House. Could you work with the likes of Cynthia Lummis and Kristen Gillibrand, who they have collaborated on a bill, but they seem to get it, right? That we have to get something through here. Would they be able to lead the charge in the Senate?
Absolutely. You just named 2 very capable U.S. senators that have this issue as a passion. Some of the challenges in the Senate are different than the House. The House is led by Republicans. The Senate is led by some Democrats. Now, the Democrats that are in charge of the Senate Banking Committee have expressed some concerns about the bills that the House is considering. And I think it will be a negotiation of sorts inside the Senate and then ultimately with the House to determine what becomes the policy and the law of the land. My sense is that the current leadership of the Senate Banking Committee has more reservations than they have reasons to advance a bill right now. We have to work through that with them.
Yeah, for sure. But my ultimate concern is Biden administration and the likes of Elizabeth Warren would try to, push this off the tracks if it were to get to that level. I don't know what the solution is here, because we've seen a lot of negative stances and language coming from the Biden administration out of the White House. Maybe they're getting wrong information. I don't know. But do you see a hurdle there, or is it going to take a seat change in the 2024 election for this to become law? Let's say it makes it through the House and the Senate, but to actually be signed into law by the president.
We have been so focused on the House and Senate, we haven't really crossed this bridge with the White House. My sense is that if the Senate were able to come to terms in a democratically controlled Senate with a proposal that made sense, that would make it easier for the White House to sign off on it. The White House will listen to a democratically led Senate and vice versa. So my sense is, working with Congresswoman Ranking Member Maxine Waters, I watched our chairman, Patrick McHenry, work with her, and the White House was involved in some of the negotiations that led to the bipartisan bill that was moved out of our committee. So it's not unreasonable to think that the White House would be weighing in along this entire process. And if we were able to pass a bill, that it would be good enough for their signature.
That's a great point. I didn't think about that the Biden administration would be influenced by the respective other Democrats. So that's a great point. Now, with all of this still being sorted out, many folks are not happy with SEC Chair Gary Gensler because they feel he is causing more confusion, more problems in the market versus solving problems. Look, there are good actors and bad actors in every market. But we're seeing the SEC going after good actors while they let the likes of FTX and Celsius happen and collapse and hurt the industry and the market. And folks are asking, how can we keep Gary Gensler accountable? Because it just seems like he's doing whatever he wants. And I know Patrick McHenry has threatened a subpoena. Can you tell us, will we see that subpoena anytime soon? What else is being worked on?
Well, you're right. Congress needs to hold Gary Gensler accountable whenever it can. We need to hold hearings, send letters, use the power of the Congressional Review Act whenever possible to make clear that when the SEC has stepped out of line, that Congress will act. In addition, the best thing we can do to reel in the SEC would be to pass our own digital asset regulatory framework. As soon as we get new statutes on the books, Gary Gensler loses the power to regulate by enforcement, and that's what he's been doing. I'll leave it up to the chairman to decide when the right time is to use a subpoena, but I can tell you Chairman McHenry has made it very clear to Gary Gensler that the House of Republicans intend to act. And, ultimately, I cannot tell you how much of my day I spend as a member of Congress dealing with the declarations of Gary Gensler, his so-called guidelines that turn into real problems for digital asset custodians, for instance, with SOB 121. I mean, this guy has definitely a bend on digital assets, and we need to speak as the Congress should, and he needs to regulate within the bounds of that. And we need to get something on the books to stop him.
Congressman, I don't know how much you can tell me about this, or even if it makes sense, but Gary Gensler, before he became the SEC chair, was teaching crypto at MIT. He applied for a job at Binance. He was talking about Algorand, a specific blockchain that you can build Uber on it. He goes to the SEC, and all of a sudden there's this 180. So is he being influenced by Elizabeth Warren and the Biden administration? Is this why this hard stance, very confusing initiatives are happening to maybe cause chaos in the markets? Is that the root of it?
I don't know. I will tell you this. He's an exceptionally bright person. He is very capable. He's articulate. And, I think he puts a lot of thought into the positions that he takes on behalf of the Securities and Exchange Commission. That said, he, from my standpoint, has been a barrier to the United States retaining our position as the most reputable financial services system in the world. If we don't play in this area with regulations and laws that protect consumers, Americans will be left behind, and wealth will be created in other nations. So yes, you're right. He has the background to really understand this space, and his time at the SEC has not been anything that would be remotely in sync with where the industry is going. My hope is that we can pass these laws, and he can get back to regulating what the Congress says should be done.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, another weird question, but people are asking me to ask you and other members of the House about this. They see a lot of letters going out, and I know they're clamoring because they want to see action, but I know there's a process to this, right? Usually we have to have dialogue, we have to figure things out, and then take action. Folks were wondering, why is it taking so long to hold Gary Gensler accountable? They're seeing a lot of letters being sent, and is it just the process? Maybe you can shed some light there and take us behind the curtain.
Well, you're right. So, the White House is occupied by Joe Biden, and Joe Biden is a Democrat, and Joe Biden gets to appoint the commissioners of all these different boards and commissions, including the Securities and Exchange Commission. And ultimately, Gary Gensler is his pick. It's good to be king. It's good to be the president, because your policy perspectives can be articulated at the agency level, and that's what's happening here. So this is much bigger than Gary Gensler. This is Joe Biden's choice, essentially to run the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is a very important regulatory institution. Until something happens in the White House, you're going to deal with who the White House wants in that job. We are doing the things that members of a legislative branch can do, and that is provide oversight, call folks in to testify, send letters that put people on notice that we think certain things are out of bounds. But the best way to change who's in that role is to change who's in the White House. And that is really one of the challenges that we're dealing with here.
For sure. And what are your thoughts on, the recent court rulings against the SEC, where they've clearly overreached and have not done things according to the law? And in the Grayscale appeal, the judge is saying the SEC acted arbitrarily and capricious. Unbelievable that a government agency is being called out like this. And it seems like more losses are down the road here. Do you think further losses will raise the level of urgency for Congress to act and to rein this in?
Well, I think on one end, the other way to get an agency's attention is to have a court block what they're attempting to do. And when that happens, they take note because they have to change course. And that's good. That's good that that's happening. It happens every day against the Corps of Engineers. It happens against the EPA and the Waters Against the United States, or Waters of the United States rule. This is one of the ways that we can police an out-of-control executive branch. And the other way is through our oversight in the legislative branch. Every single time a victory in court tears down an effort of the Securities and Exchange Commission, not only does that regulation go away, but the SEC looks weaker. And I think there's some value in noting that this is happening. It gives Congress more impetus to act as well.
For sure. Let's talk about stablecoins, because there's so many layers to stablecoins as it relates to the dollar being the world reserve currency and the U.S. being able to maintain that world reserve currency. We're seeing different issuers of stablecoins, like PayPal recently issued a stablecoin. We have Circle's USDC, and then there's Tether, the largest stablecoin. And we could possibly anticipate other folks are going to issue stablecoins. I know this is a tough question. There's a lot to still be figured out here. Can you tell me about what you and the other folks at the House of Financial Services Committee are talking about as it relates to regulating this? Because I know it's complex, and once again, the world reserve currency aspect of it.
Yeah, well, I've had a lot of experience with stablecoins. When I was a member of the Nebraska legislature, I passed a law in our state, making Nebraska the second state in the nation behind Wyoming, to allow state charter banks to take custody of digital assets, including stablecoins. And the stablecoins we're talking about are essentially $1 equals one stablecoin. Right. And they're safe. There's some talk about staking, but ultimately, this is the way the world's going to work, and it's going to lead to more competition. I have folks from Guatemala originally that work in a packing plant in Madison, Nebraska, and they send $1,700 a month down to their family in Guatemala, and they pay an outrageous money transmitting fee. As we develop these stable coins, you're going to see the cost of using that stable coin go way down and transferring it between countries, and just taking the steps that need to be taken to make things work better for people that are in the money transmitting business. I'm excited about stablecoins. In fact, I'm more excited about stablecoins than the commodity side of digital assets, the Bitcoin. I think as we enter Web 3.0 with tokenization, these stablecoins are going to start allowing a whole new amount of commerce on the interwebs. That's going to things that people will never predict today will happen in the next 5 to 10 years, because we will have a regulatory framework for stablecoins, and I really think it's coming. And I talk to people all the time. They're like, "Well, why doesn't the FDIC regulate stablecoins?" And I'm like, as long as you are custodying a stablecoin, you've got to have that $1 that equals one stablecoin. They're entirely safe, and with the blockchain, all of that can be monitored and where it's going. I just think there are so many upsides, and what we have right now in Congress was we've had everybody trying to make sure that nothing bad ever happens to anybody, and the cost of that is innovation. We have to have good regulation, but we cannot suffocate innovation. And I think the stablecoin conversation has been underappreciated by even folks in fintech. I'm hopeful that legislation passes through the House and is adopted as well by the Senate. I think just basic rules will make a big difference there.
Yeah, absolutely. Question for you: which agency would facilitate the auditing of stablecoin companies and their reserves? Because obviously, like I said, you have good actors and bad actors in every market, right? So that's true for crypto. How do we make sure that they have those reserves in place? And I for example, I trust the folks at Circle. They provide audits and so forth. But who's going to police this?
Well, one of the things that I push very hard for in our legislation that the Financial Services Committee has moved to the floor is a federal and a state pathway. For instance, in the state of Nebraska, or let's pick the state of New York, it would be the New York DFS that would regulate custodians of stablecoins. If you're a member FDIC bank, you would have your bank exam that would look at your ability to custody stablecoins and that you meet the reserves and that you are operating. So I see this as a banking function. One of the big questions on the committee is who are we going to let into this? Who's going to have access to the federal payment rail system? Yeah. I see a lot of value in our banking system in America. We have one of the most diverse systems in the world. We have the GSIBs, we have the regionals, we have the community banks, we have the federal path, we have the state path. That diversity has made us more powerful as compared to the EU. And I think in that process, we have to look at existing regulators that are working with the current custodians of people's money. And I'm trying to keep the SEC out of the stablecoin business.
Yeah, I mean, it's unbelievable that they're calling stablecoin securities. I just don't get it. It's very strange. And with that said, we see a lot of banks are applying for crypto custody licenses and trading services for crypto. What are your thoughts on some of the biggest names in Wall Street entering the market? BlackRock, Franklin Templeton. It seems that as we're talking about, the technology is here to stay, and it seems they recognize that and they're getting involved.
Well, I think it speaks to the potential of blockchain and the depth of investor demand that these giants of finance are getting involved. BlackRock is pursuing a Bitcoin ETF, which is something that I have advocated the SEC approve, assuming applicants meet the proper requirements, to your point. Lots of investors are interested in digital assets, but aren't necessarily comfortable with some of the technical components involved, with buying or selling crypto directly. An ETF for some of these larger digital asset tokens like Bitcoin or Ether would give more retail investors the opportunity to get some exposure to crypto. I'm also pleased that after losing in the courts, the SEC has indicated some willingness to process and ultimately approve Bitcoin ETF applications that meet the SEC's previous requirements. So, Fidelity is working to serve its broker-dealer customers that are interested in, buying and selling crypto. If a market structure proposal were to pass Congress, we'd see other brokers get involved in this space as well. So I think it speaks very well for the interest in the market, that these major giants of finance are getting involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about CBDCs. And there's a lot to talk about here. We know that the Fed is exploring a digital dollar, which of course is a CBDC, and China has launched their CBDC. It's out in the wild. Other countries are exploring this. It seems this is the future. They're taking fiat currencies, tokenizing on the blockchain. There's going to be a ton of benefits, right? And the velocity of money and instant settlement and much more. But a lot of folks are concerned about losing our privacy, and maybe some draconian leader or government comes in place and takes advantage of the control that these CBDCs offer. What are your thoughts on this? And once again, there's pros and there's cons, but the risks that are there.
Well, I am firmly opposed to a retail central bank digital currency. My opposition to a CBDC comes down to one simple concern. You talked about it. It's a simple concern at the heart of our republic: concentration of power in the hands of the federal government. I'm a co-sponsor of Tom Emmer's Central Bank Digital Currency Anti-Surveillance State Act, which would help prohibit a centrally controlled digital currency as our economy continues to innovate in the area of digital assets. I think a CBDC issued by the Federal Reserve would open the door to a few different troubling futures, probably regardless of the intent of the original issuer. If we use a retail CBDC, the Fed would be at the center of every American transaction, and apply that same thinking to our current banking system, and it's just totally decimates what we've built here in the United States with a very diverse banking system. So I come down firmly against a central bank digital currency. I think most all Republicans are 100% united on this, and even some Democrats share our concerns about a CBDC. So, for me, that's a non-starter.
Question though, in the competitive global market that we're in, and it goes back to that US dollar being the world reserve currency. So let's say China is inserting your digital yuan in different countries, different markets and regions. How can the US compete with that? Is it taking a stable coin, for example, just USDC, and adopting that? It's free market, built by the private sector and so forth. Is that a possible solution?
It is a possible solution. I mean, that's one of the reasons I'm so excited about stablecoins, and one of the reasons I think they don't get as much attention as they should. I think that we have the ability to. We don't want to suffocate innovation, and I don't want to rely on a central bank digital currency from China. If anything were politically manipulative, it would be exactly that. I mean, these are people that wake up every day and want to see the demise of the United States. They are an enemy of our country, and we cannot allow them to grow their central bank digital currency into all these different countries. We need to let innovation take heed, and let the American spirit of free enterprise, run wild across the globe, provided consumers are protected.
For sure. Do you think? And then this is a bigger question because there's other macro factors that are involved here. But you got the BRICS countries, many who are talking about leaving, not using the US dollar anymore and so forth. Do you think a stable coin done right and used and the setup being right could help bring those countries back versus them going to use a digital ruble or a digital yuan?
Potentially. I mean, I know we won't know if we don't try. I think there's this anti-American sentiment that's been spread by the Chinese all over the globe, and we can't suppose to know every single reason that one of these countries signs up for this, but there's definitely a push to make sure we're not a world superpower, and remaining a world superpower and doing and preserving and protecting freedom around the world is in our national interest. So, I think that we will get it right. We will maintain our position in that we have the best financial services system in the world, and we just have to wrap our policy positions around what's happening and then get to work.
Yeah, absolutely. And these are things I think about in being involved in crypto and blockchain, and how the US can maintain that status, because I live in the United States. I want to continue to live in the United States. And my worry is that we lose out on this, but I have some optimism that we'll get it right sooner than later and be back in the driver's seat here with these things. I got some wrap-up questions here for you. Sure. First is, if you could create your own metaverse, what would the theme be about?
I haven't got to do this much in my life, but I love the trial by jury aspect of our government. The idea that 12 members of your community sit and listen to evidence and then make a decision as to your guilt or your innocence, or your culpability or your negligence, or whether or not you were even negligent at all. If I had my own metaverse, I would like to sit in some of the world's most prolific trials and see the evidence myself, watch the facial expressions of the litigants and the judge and my fellow jurors, and then participate in rendering a verdict. I think that's something that would be fascinating for people to see how our justice system works, and to use the metaverse to really experience what it's like to be in that room when Al Capone is getting tried, or some of the world's biggest questions are being answered in a court of law. So that would be mine. I know that's kind of probably a little geeky, but it would be something I would enjoy.
Yeah, me too. I find that fascinating. I always go back to the movie The Few Good Men, right? And the nature of the dialogue. And I know it's sensationalized a little bit for the movie, but still, it's still fascinating to be able to look at different evidence, like you said, and look at the faces, expressions of the jurors and things along those lines. So I definitely agree with you there.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for having me.
One more item before I let you go. Rapid fire questions. Favorite food?
Spaghetti.
Favorite musician or band?
Alabama. I like myself some country music.
Nice. Favorite movie?
Oh, that has to be the Blues Brothers.
Favorite book?
Well, there you go. Well, I'm in my office right now. My favorite book. I have read since I got to Congress, I'm on a plane like literally 5 hours a week. And so I have read so many books, just trying to pass the time. Oh, hang on a second. I got to look back here. Hold on. I got to get to the right answer. Actually, it would be a book called Strong Towns. Just something I read recently about urban planning. I don't have the author's name off the top of my head, but it'd be a book called Strong Towns.
Nice. And final, what do you do for a hobby or a pastime?
I like to sit in front of my fire when it's cold in Nebraska and get all my wood up and going and just relax. That's what I like to do the best.
That's awesome. I enjoy that time as well. I have a fire pit in the back. I'll crack open a beer, sit in front of the fire pit, get the fire going, and just be in my relax and think about certain things. So
you and I are alike then.
Congressman Flood, pleasure chatting with you, and thank you for all the great work you've been doing on behalf of the crypto industry.
Awesome. Thank you very much. You have a good weekend.